Hello, I'm Bill Crookston, Professor of Entrepreneurship at the Lloyd Greif Center for Entrepreneurial Studies at the Marshall School of Business at University of Southern California. And today we're very privileged to have with us Dr. Sidney Harman. Dr. Harman, as a leader not only in business, but also as a former college president, you are in a very unique position to discuss the intersection of education and commerce. Please share your thoughts about the crossroads of these two endeavors.
I can't imagine a world of true creativeness in the arena of commerce, uninformed, unilluminated by a whole arrangement of other intellectual engagements. It is all too often thought that commerce is a simple, transactional affair, and that the rules are narrow and invariable. And I believe that it is a field of enormous creative opportunity, but those who come to it with interests that are varied and substantial are much, much more likely to be the source of inspiration, of innovation, of creativeness that all you junkies in that world ask for. And so I have been heard before to say, get me some poets as managers, as business managers. And I never say it simply to be theatrical. I say it because poets are our original systems thinkers. They look at a complicated and often mysterious world, and they see it not in rigid, inflexible terms, but they see the patterns of that fascinating world, and they are at their best those who reduce the complex to the sublime. It is the way in which poets think. Find me managers who think that way, and I'll get you a lot of innovation.
Well said. You helped develop an entire industry, high fidelity, with the launch of Harman Kardon 56 years ago. Please talk to us about the founding of this company. How did you assess the risks and rewards? Did you appreciate then that this whole new endeavor with implications on the quality of our lives?
Did you say 56 years ago?
That's what I said.
And you ask about the founding. My best recollection is that my mother was taking me home from the hospital, and she said to me, "Sonny, what would you like to do for the rest of your life?" And I said, "I'd like to found a new industry." That's about how it went. In truth, I had one job other than my time in the military and my time in government. I've had one job working for someone other than a company I had founded, and that job was in the engineering department of a small manufacturer of public address equipment in New York City, where I was working in the engineering department. Now, my perspective then, and I hope this doesn't disappoint you, Professor, my perspective then was that I'd like to make a living. Remember now, we were coming out of the worst economic depression in certainly our lifetimes, and I recall with no difficulty at all sitting around with friends, chatting about our future, and every one of us said, if I could be guaranteed an income of $5,000 a year for life, I would sign up now. So my first inspiration was to make a living. That may not seem terribly poetic, but in the course of working in this company, I made a very special friend. He was the chief engineer of the company. each of us had a love of music, and together we began to modify the public address equipment that we manufactured. And you remember that stuff. You would see it, big horns mounted on the top of trucks, rolling down the streets, and the voice inside bellowing, "Vote for Jane Harman for president," or something of the sort. We would take the equipment and modify it so that we could play our 78 RPM vinyl records of Mozart or Sinatra at home. And our friends would come in and listen to this stuff and say, "My God, that is unimaginable." And I attempted to persuade the owner of that nice little business that there must be a constituency out there for this kind of superior product. I remind you that in those days, most music was listened to on tiny little 3-tube AC DC radios, or, if you were wealthy, on gigantic furniture consoles in which were hidden tiny little 3-tube AC DC radios. This was a very special way to listen to music. He thought I was out of my mind, and so the chief engineer, Bernard Kardon, and I wrestled together $10,000, and we began Harman Kardon in 1953. So your arithmetic was somewhat better than mine. Then it was to just have a good time. You asked whether we, in effect, you asked, did I have a vision that we were in process of founding a great new industry? I'm as good at revisionist history as anyone else, but we damn well did not. We had two impulses: do something we got a kick out of, try to scrabble out a living. And my goodness, while that was going on, a new industry was being created, and we were at the center of it.
Work and family issues are at the forefront of America's corporate issues. You've been a leader in this, particularly in the quality of work life. The programs you initiated at Harman Kardon. How have programs like this helped to shape the American workplace? And why are they important, even more so today?
I wish they proliferated. I wish they had and continued to be much more influential in the workplace. Your question, in part, is how have they shaped the workplace? To the extent that they have been pursued, and I'll take a moment about the programs, to the extent that they've been pursued, they've had a remarkable impact on the workplace. And I have spent a very substantial part of this last half century of my life proselytizing programs of that sort, as I know you know. I wish those of us who engage in that had been much more successful. One of the reasons that I am lecturing at your sainted university is that it gives me an opportunity to kind of promote that point of view to students and faculty and others on a canvas I rather enjoy. Let me speak of the first of the efforts in that respect. You had indicated in your introduction to this conversation that there was a time when I was serving as president of a college. It was a very interesting, transnational, experimental Quaker college. I was no Quaker, I am no Quaker, but I saw enormous value in the values that drove that undertaking, and I became fascinated by the writings and the teachings of two educators, Paulo Freire and Ivan Illich. These were among the most innovative and progressive thinkers in learning and epistemology, I think, in the Western world. And their view of learning was substantially in contradiction of the traditional view of learning, and the traditional was seen by them, and you'll forgive me, shared by me, as the faculty, as in possession of all the knowledge worth having in the world, with the responsibility of somehow feeding bits of it into the empty vessels that were the students. Said we, knowing better we thought, that's got it upside down. The way to learn is to place responsibility in the student and to move bottom up with the faculty clearly then as resource. That enormous level of responsibility visited on the student was not at all a matter of go play in the sandbox, children. It represented a significant burden. Now, we were hardly the first people in the history of education to think that way. Read Socrates. There was the first progenitor of that point of view. Here I was running that college bottom up and spending full time at it. And another time I'll explain to you how it was possible for me to spend full time at that and simultaneously spend full time running my company. But what was interesting was that I was running my company top down, autocratic, authoritative, traditional, even as I was running the college bottom up. Came a moment in a town of Bolivar, Tennessee, named for Simon Bolivar, and not a soul in that town had ever heard of him. There were two institutions in the town, one the State Insane Asylum, and the other a factory we had inherited as part of a larger acquisition. Those two institutions were regarded as fungible. It didn't really matter whether you were in the State Insane Asylum or in our company, no real difference. And the place in Bolivar that was our factory, I confess today, was one of the worst places in the country to be employed. That was the part of the South that was incurably retrogressive. The incidence of alcoholism, of drug abuse, of suicide in that plant and in the community, the highest in the country. I'm taking my time to answer your question. I think it is a central question. The company produced side view mirrors for the automakers. You know what these are. You can hardly think of driving without them. In those days, the mirrors were housed in die castings and controlled by a flexible cable into the car. Those castings needed to be polished and buffed, preparatory to painting them to match the colors of the car. The department known as the Polish and Buff Department was the worst department and the worst of factories. There, some dozen old black men, and in Bolivar, Tennessee, in those days, if you were 40 years old, you were old. It was pretty bad stuff. And to make it worse, the work that they did had them holding these castings against the buffing wheels with a buffing compound that sprayed in the air, sprayed in their lungs. Tough stuff. On the second shift at 10 p.m., there was a coffee break for 10 minutes. The buzzer that signaled the coffee break failed. Local management, in its infinite wisdom, said, we know how to activate a buzzer at 10 minutes after 10, no problem. We'll simply move the coffee break. Then it was that one of these old black men working in the polish department in the plant in Bolivar changed my life forever. He, with that wonderful biblical name, No Be Cross, said, I don't work for no buzzer. The buzzer, he pronounced, The buzzer works for me. I got me a watch, said Noby Cross. I know when it's 10 o'clock. And at 10 o'clock, he went off to his coffee break. The other 11 men working in that awful polish department followed him. All hell broke loose. Management said this was an insurrection, insubordination. I, working in my office, in my suit with my tie closed. In, of course, you would know it, Lake Success, Long Island, had this call, you better get your little butt down here. This place is in civil war. Went down to Bolivar, Tennessee, and had an epiphany. Saw the utter contradiction between running the college, bottom up, running this company top down. Decided to try to apply the lessons of the college to the factory floor. It is widely recognized and taught in some other business schools as the Bolivar Project, the first effort in American industrial history to alter the traditional adversary relationship between managers and workers. And it was astonishing. Let me tell you just quickly a couple of things that we did there. By the way, the first time ever that the phrase empowering the worker was used was there in Bolivar, Tennessee, in that plant. We had a newspaper, company newspaper. We had them at every division of the company everywhere in the country. They were all interchangeable. They all looked the same. Glossy paper, front page picture of the boss, message from the boss. The inside, a gathering of volleyball scores and birthday dates and nothing of real interest. We started a newspaper in Bolivar, Tennessee, with the not very promising name, the Bolivar Mirror. And we encouraged the people in Bolivar to write for that newspaper. And I will never forget, the first day I came down there, the editor of the newspaper, an employee who volunteered to do it, was in a room almost this large with paper spread all over a giant old oak table. And she said to me, "We've got all this material here waiting for your approval." And I said, "You're not waiting for my approval. I have no such role. You print anything and everything in there that is even reasonably appropriate, as long as it is civil and as long as it speaks the truth from the point of view of the writer. And no one here is going to control it." Well, that was an astonishing statement from that point of view, but the consequence of it was the paper became the most widely read paper in our universe of companies. People who'd never even heard of Bolivar were reading the Bolivar Mirror. We had a school on the premises, on company time. You might think the school taught people how to solder better, how to be better lathe operators. No such thing. What was taught in that school, on company premises, on company time, was what employees of the company said they knew and were willing to share with others. As a consequence, it won't surprise you, we had a good number of people spending their time learning how to write. And that found its expression in that marvelous People's newspaper. And there were stories in that People's newspaper about days in the old country, time in the civil rights movement. I remember Mama. It was vivid stuff. In the school, someone volunteered to teach piano. We bought one old upright piano, and we manufactured, so to speak, 4 cardboard keyboards. we produced some 14 of them because there were that many people in the class who were interested in learning piano. They learned how to finger cardboard keyboards, and then they took turns on the piano. I could go on. Those were the classes, and you might well ask, what the devil does that have to do with the manufacture of rear-view mirrors or any other product? And I tell you, everything. The people moved by activities such as that in that school developed a personal, emotional equity in the company.
Right.
And when that happens, the levels of productivity and innovation and creativity on the factory floor can blow your mind. And so the cost of doing this became insignificant when compared to the results. People have often heard me talk about this kind of thing and said, wait a minute, that's paternalism. The hell it is. It is very good business. But I haven't really forgotten your question. Here is the answer to the question. As that program developed, it altered the way the people in that factory thought about their lives and themselves, and as a consequence, the community. And ultimately, they ran for the Board of Education, and they ran for the City Council. They transformed the character of that retrograde community, and I've never been prouder of anything I was ever engaged in than that undertaking. And it took a long time, but I think I responded to your question, Professor.
I'm proud of that answer. That's wonderful. Thank you very much. Your book, Starting with People, co-written with Daniel Yankelovich, is now in its 20th year of publication. As co-author of one of the earliest books on workplace quality of life and economic policy, we'd be interested to learn more about the story behind this important research and work.
Well, in fact, we've been talking about it. Dan Yankelovich is one of our great social scientists, and I think it's fair to say he continues to flourish in that role. And much of his work over the years has been to research the differences in the way policymakers think of the critical issues of our days and the way citizens see those same issues, whether the issue you're talking about is war and peace, or individual development, or learning. The contradictions he has demonstrated are mind-blowing. And finding reconciliation between the two is clearly crucial. We sit here on a historic morning. We will, before this day is done, have elected a historic, transforming figure, I have no doubt, to the presidency of the United States. Central to his work will be chasing that equilibrium. And one could characterize that equilibrium as one between the mind and the heart, equally as well as the way I characterized it a moment ago. That book was an effort to reach for that material and to see it translated into the workplace. And as the question we just reviewed explored that point of view and its potential consequences, I think the book, if it was, as I like to think it was, an introduction to that kind of thinking, made the book consequential.
Rousseau once said, as soon as public service ceases to be the chief business of the citizens, the state is not far from its fall. Your career has been a strong marriage of corporate success and service to your fellow citizens, including your years in the Carter administration as Deputy Secretary of Commerce. Dr. Harman, what are your thoughts on the leader's obligation to public service?
I pause because you ask the question about the leader's obligation to public service. If you'll modify it to make it the citizen's obligation to public service, I'll be a good deal more comfortable. Because, and I mean not to quibble, I would suggest that leadership may well grow out of the citizen's determination about the value and the importance of public service. One who has done it finds from time to time people who say things like, "I thank you for it," as though it were a singular gift from the person doing it to the society. This is not some false exercise in modesty. I'll tell you, it doesn't work that way. These matters are reflexive and mutually reflexive. The person who provides the public service draws so much from it if he or she is aware and open to it that it is a simply wonderful and often self-serving transaction and shouldn't therefore be glorified the way we tend to glorify it. One of the lessons I learned in my time in public service, and I suppose this had something to do with how I got there, one of the lessons I learned in public service is that we have made something of a comic exercise of belittling the bureaucrat. You remember the ubiquitous cartoons of that guy sitting with his feet up on a desk and a cigar in his mouth, wasting the public treasure. I found, because I did something very unusual, it may indeed have been unique, and I did it because I was no politician, and I came to that role of the Deputy Secretary of Commerce through a curious accident. I found that the people in the department, and for that matter in the other departments of government I encountered, were nothing like the stereotypes. They were overwhelmingly young people, then quite capable of getting themselves work in industry at far higher levels of compensation. Often, more often than not, family people, young people, married, children, that kind of thing, working in government out of a sense of patriotism and a sense of giving to their country and its people. I might say those were leaders. I found in that time in government the application of the principles we were talking about just a little bit ago on the factory floor to be no less relevant. And I have to tell you, one hell of a good time. Now, if you want to call that leadership, that's fine with me.
Doctor, your philanthropic record shines through your extensive endeavors, through the institutions including the Martin Luther King Center for Social Change, the Public Agenda Foundation, the Council on Foreign Relations, LA Philharmonic, and the National Symphony Orchestra. And of course, the John F. Kennedy School of Government, and what you're doing now for us here at USC. We'd be interested to learn more about why you selected some of these institutions to give your time, talent, and treasure.
Well, again, I mean not to be difficult, but I'm not sure that I agree with the premise. I didn't quite select them. I would like to think they selected me, but as you well know, so many of these things are pleasant accidents. Someone you know speaks to you of your interest in the arts, and mine is lifelong, and broad, and perhaps tries to raise some money from you for the arts. And that leads you to join the organization or the institution. I could go on. Many, many of these connections arise out of some kind of social or historic accident. But what, in effect, conjoins them is that one finds her values represented there and responds to the invitations or the opportunities because you find that material there and resonant with what you think is meaningful. Example, I believe that in our culture, and most particularly in the industrial expression of our culture, the arts are seen in this country as decoration. Something like a new dress, a change in personal style, something business people turn to when they are retired. Now I think I'll possibly go to listen to a symphony, visit a museum. It is decoration, they think. I argue, and I'm not alone, that the arts ought to be seen as the lubricant of a lifetime. The arts ought to be seen as organic. The arts should enter our lives early and should inform and illuminate them all through. The most creative business people I've ever encountered are those, if you like, the poets I was talking about earlier, who see the arts as the prism through which they look at their work in industry or in education or in government. It's hardly surprising I'm attracted to that. One consequence of it is the existence in Washington, D.C., of the Harman Center for the Arts. It is home to the Shakespeare Theater Company, arguably the best Shakespeare repertory company in the Western world today. And in Washington, known for the Kennedy Center, magnificent facility for the arts, but located in such a fashion that unless you have an automobile and the funds, it's difficult to get there, difficult to make real serious use of it. So we built a new theater in downtown Washington. Every means of transportation, including pony, will get you there. And this marvelous theater is now home to the Shakespeare Company, to the Washington Ballet, to 20 performing arts organizations in Washington. And it has brightened the downtown community and attracted increasingly a multilingual, multinational, multicultural, young audience. If you think, as I do, that the arts are crucial to life, then it's easy enough to be attracted by that. And if you are fortunate enough to have generated some money, that's a heck of a good place to spend it.
The Writer-in-Residence program you founded at your alma mater, Baruch College, is celebrating its 10th anniversary. Please tell us some more about this program and your views on the role of the arts, I guess you already have, how it's integral and organic into daily life.
Well, of course, I welcome the question because, as you point out, we've been talking about that material. Some years ago, the then president of Baruch College, who is now the chancellor of the State University System of New York, came to see me seeking a contribution. That's the way it works in that world, as you well know. And I said to him that I would make a contribution, but I'd make a consequential contribution if he would commit himself to something that I thought frightfully important. This was a business school, Baruch College in New York. Start a program there that invited the best writers in the country to come and proselytize writing to these kids who in the college, as in virtually all the business colleges I had then encountered, thought of writing as a pedestrian exercise, the simple transfer of stored intellectual inventory from the mind to paper. Writing is discredited in much of industry, and that's a disgrace. And it is not a disgrace because I am some kind of intellectual snob who thinks that that's a nice and elegant thing to do. It's a disgrace because writing is one of the magical tools that separates the pedestrian business person from the creative business person. And those kids in business school who really learn how to write have a tool, a process available to them that will distinguish them from the others and give them what we tend to call a competitive or comparative advantage that is rarely ever identified. Writing is not a mere transfer of intellectual stored information. Writing is discovery. If we had more time, I'd spend a few days talking about this. Let me see how I can say it. The day I was introduced as your Entrepreneur of the Year, you may remember, was with a video of that unimaginably competent fellow, Pete Carroll. A great, great football coach, but a man capable of genuine inspiration. And there he was, evoking it, saying to his people, "Know who you are." And I spent the hour you gave me there doing a riff on "Know Who You Are." And I said, in effect, it's all fine and good for Pete Carroll to tell you, know who you are. I'm going to tell you that you won't begin to have a clue to who you are until you begin to know what it is you truly believe in. For me, that has been essence. And I have discovered what I believe in through the careful contemplation of enormous reading over a lifetime. And I think it's fair to say that I have discovered and learned through reading, and then I have discovered what I know through writing. Nobody who has ever done even a modest bit of writing has failed to experience this. She reads something this morning she wrote last night, and in reading it responds, "I didn't know I knew that." Writing is revelatory. Writing, in the marvelous phrase of the great Welsh poet Dylan Thomas, the blank page on which I read my mind. And so I have not forgotten the point of the question. I underwrote this program, Writers in Residence at a Business School, and you will be delighted to know, Bill, that I am told 10 years after. Our first writer in residence, by the way, was Edward Albee. Our current writer in residence is the Poet Laureate of the United States. I am told it is the most popular course in that business college whose student population is overwhelmingly economically disadvantaged and kids from abroad. They apparently believe that what I'm arguing here has some merit.
You must be very proud of your wife, Congresswoman Jane Harman. Talk to us, if you will, about her decision to serve her state and her country as a U.S. representative, and also your experience of being a congressional spouse.
Well, let me start with that. I can give it to you in a capsule. I've been taking a lengthy time to answer most of your questions. This one can be brief. We could go to a large, formal dinner in Washington every night of the week. We limit them, if for no other reason than that I limit them. But I had my absolute comeuppance in the answer to your question 2 weeks ago in Washington. We went to one of these dinners. Typically, you walk in, there's a long table, and on the table, arranged in alphabetical order, are little envelopes with the names of the guests. And you get the envelope, you pick up your envelope, you open it, and it tells you the table you're seated at. And so if you are Joe Biden coming to that dinner, you pick up an envelope that reads, the Honorable Joseph Biden and Mrs. Biden. And if you are Arnold Schwarzenegger, you'll pick up an envelope that will read, the Honorable and Mrs. Arnold Schwarzenegger. I picked up our envelope, and our envelope read, the Honorable and Mr. Jane Harman. I think that tells you pretty much everything about the role. Jane was born to this stuff. I'm asked from time to time when it was she decided that she wanted to do it. I said as her mother was taking her out of the doctor's hands, the first thing her mother noticed was Jane raising her finger, Mr. President, just one word. She's been a marvelous, marvelous congressperson. And my expectation is that in this marvelous new administration, you will find her serving her country in another and perhaps more elevated role. Life as a spouse is not always easy. I've already explained my role, but I've learned that there is something occasionally beautiful about learning how to walk 3 feet behind your spouse.
Here at Marshall, we place great importance on the role of leadership. Do you believe that leadership can be taught? And if so, what are the best ways of engaging young people in this study?
Well, since I don't believe it can be taught, I won't answer the question that way. In fact, it's, for me, a consequential question. There are, and I think you know that I'm spending my time, a considerable amount of my time, lecturing across the campus. I've been at the schools of architecture and law and medicine, at public policy and business and technology, at arts, letters, and science, of course at gerontology, and virtually every college at the university I go to has a class or a program in leadership. And the question arises all the time about teaching leadership. I would argue that it is an incorrect beginning, an incorrect perspective. The courses and programs on leadership are important and even crucial. I absolutely agree. But I would argue that the role of the teacher, the professor, is to tap into that capacity for leadership that exists in virtually all of the students. Our job, I would think, as teachers, is not to teach it, but to release it, to encourage it, to inform it, to illuminate it, to make it interesting, but to reveal it. An image. Michelangelo asked once about that glorious David sculpture, how in the world did you produce it out of a block? Michelangelo's response was, it was always there. All I did was release it from the granite. I think that's the job of the educator in leadership. If we proceed on the basis that these are the rules, these are the steps, this is not the same as teaching somebody how to drive an automobile. This is the material, if you like, of poetry. You don't teach poetry. You encourage it. You farm it. You cultivate that garden. You know, I kind of like that image.
Please talk about the leaders that you most admire and why.
Well, we don't have all that much time, but I run them off in a hurry for you. Gandhi, Martin Luther King. I'll start with those. They did a kind of leadership that I think is glorious and stunningly productive. You know that I worked for a person I regard as a great man who will ultimately be well and generously treated by history. President Carter was a leader, and yet I did not speak of him immediately as you asked the question. I mean him no disrespect. The wonder of President Carter was that at every meeting that I participated in, and certainly there were a considerable number of them, small or large, irrespective of the subject, the president seemed to be, irrespective of the participants in the meeting, the most informed. It really didn't matter whether we were talking about law or security or foreign relations or health or fiscal policy. He was stunning in that respect, and I have tremendous respect for that. And there was many a meeting where I would hear somebody say something that struck me as a fascinating idea, and I would borrow it and perhaps offer it later as my own. But Gandhi and King had a facility for doing something that I never experienced there. They catalyzed something in that gathering. They provoked something among the participants that nobody brought to the meeting. They generated a kind of creative synthesis that the participants produced something that no one of them could have generated alone. I love the image of Gandhi calling to his people, "Wait for me, I'm your leader." That's a glorious image of leadership. I think of Wynton Marsalis, that superb young musician, that great poet, that humanist, that leader. Do you know where he leads his jazz orchestra of 17 great musicians? Not in front of them, in the tradition of the conductor leader. He sits in the last row. And he does it as much for the imagery as for anything else. But that's a fabulous image of leadership. the leaders who are focused on the development of the followers, as distinguished from the lionizing of the leader, those, I think, are the leaders to admire. I am hopeful that the next leader of this country has just that capacity. He has many of us to develop.
Sidney, tell us about your leadership style.
Well, I hope I follow something of the formulation I have just offered. I think it unproductive for a leader to determine that he, she knows it all. I told you of this, for me, stunning epiphany in Bolivar, Tennessee, when Noby Cross said, "I don't work for no buzzer, the buzzer works for me." That was a proclamation of great consequence in my thinking. Consider what he was saying, and consider how it might guide your thinking as a leader. The buzzer is, if you will, the expression of our technology. The trick, as you think about technology, whether you are running an educational institution or a business or a technical development agency, the trick, it seems to me, is to think about the technology not as instrumentation to show off how bloody damn smart the engineers are, or the scientists are. It is to serve the person it is addressed to. The buzzer, said Noby Cross, is only there to be of assistance to me. If it does its job, fine. If it doesn't, I'll find another way to deal with it. When Noby Cross said that, he summoned my attention to the relationship of the organization to the people. The organization's role, I have no doubt, is to concentrate on the development of the people, and in the development of the people to inspire them and to encourage their productive most and their creative most. It is the way I think about leadership. I hope I am being a leader when I talk to the young people on this campus. I never say to them, this is how to do it. I may say to them, this is how I do it. This is how others have done it. Your job, I repeat, your job is to learn who you are by first determining what it is you truly believe in. Here are some hints about how to go about determining what you really believe in. I think I've talked to you a little bit about what I think of leadership.
Indeed. 7 years ago, I started a class in social entrepreneurship, and our dean has now transformed that into our society and business lab. It's going to bridge the needs of community service agencies with the non-cash resources of corporate America. Sidney is an early advocate of this. We welcome your perspective on social responsibility and civic engagement.
Well, we've talked about this bill. I would hardly dismiss it if someone in industry decided, in the familiar vocabulary, time to give back. Too often that giving back is a matter of giving some money and maybe getting your name on a building or the entrance to the men's room. God, this place speaks of it as every institution, as a matter of necessity, does it. I think that's really inadequate. I think it was Oliver Wendell Holmes who said that it is required of a man, he said a man, to be engaged in the action and passion of his days, or risk being judged not to have lived. He was saying engage in the action and passion of his days. He didn't say give it money. And so you speak of social entrepreneurship. I think it is crucially important. I think it is no less important that the person truly engage it, not just help finance it, be a participant in the action, and in the process learn and grow and reap great benefit from it. I don't just promote the idea, I'm doing it.
These are tough economic times, and perhaps particularly challenging for students who hope to enter the corporate arena. What advice would you give our students at this teachable moment in our nation's economic history?
Well, it's a heck of a question, but I've been asked that question now almost every day for the last months. There is no magic answer. The most any of us can do, and with all respect, I think this is no less true for you than it is for me, is help these guys improve the odds. It's tough stuff. To decorate it in any other way is irresponsible and hardly of much service to these guys. I spoke at a gathering at Harman International a couple of weeks ago, a month ago. A plant that in these difficult times is having layoffs. I hate layoffs. And I don't just hate them because I'm paternalistic. I also think that all too often people in industry fail to recognize how much they've already invested in the workers. This is strictly business talk, if you will. You spend a great deal of money training people to do the jobs. And when you dismiss them because things are tough, somehow the P&L doesn't reflect that cost. And there is cycle in business, and if you have confidence in this country, you believe that cycle will re-enable, then you go out and you rehire people and you invest it all over again. At least think carefully before you turn them out and think of that cost, if nothing else. I say to these guys, the company, the most enlightened of companies, is facing difficult times and difficult choices. What you must do, and I said it to the people at Harman because they were going to face this layoff after careful consideration of what I've been talking about. Time for you to look into yourself. You've got to find the best in you. This is not easy. But anybody who suggests to you there's some simple way to solve this dilemma is wasting your time and that person's time. Here, don't waste your time. Here, summon the most in you, develop as ably as you can the facility and the capacity that is in you, and recognize that you're not going to step out of here into some juicy job tomorrow, but give it your most. Be patient, be courageous. Improve your personal odds. I don't think saying any more than that is fair or reasonable, but that's saying a lot.
A popular phrase today, and I'm using it all the time in the classroom, an aha moment. When an important idea or a life theme crystallizes. What was your Sidney Harman's aha moment?
Well, I've had a number of them. I mentioned one. I think that was crucial for me, the realization through the person of no B cross, how contradictory were the patterns of my life, and the determination to resolve and to integrate them. That was, if you like, an aha moment of consequence to me. My introduction to the civil rights movement was more than an aha moment. It was a time in my life that gave vivid meaning to everything I had read and everything I had contemplated, and has really informed what I've done, and really has a rather great deal to do with how I think about learning and how I think about the workplace and how I think about civic responsibility. My introduction to Martin Luther King, and I did, in fact, know that glorious man, was an aha moment. I'll give you a business aha moment. We had acquired a company in Germany, this is 15 years ago, Becker Radio, at one time a quite famous company in Germany. It made all the radios for Mercedes, car radios for Mercedes-Benz. It was pretty much on the way to its own funeral at the time that we acquired it, and the story of how we acquired it could entertain you and your classes. It was very funny, and it was very meaningful, and I learned a great deal from it. But nonetheless, we had acquired it, and I remind you, it was in tough shape. A group of engineers said to me that they would wish to see me, and it was my practice, if we acquired a company, to come back a week or two after the matter was closed, present myself to the people, talk to them about my views of the company, its place in the world, them, my relationship with them. I remember in a different setting, the most important thing I said to the people of a company we acquired here in the United States was, the first thing we're going to do tomorrow is pave the parking lot. It's a pretty modest idea, but for those people who in that Midwest town found the parking lot engulfed in water every time it rained, that was a major step. Anyhow, these fellas took me up to the lab, and there, sitting on a table 4 or 5 times larger than that one, they had assembled a gathering of cardboard boxes, each of which represented an analog function that could be used in the car. Thus, one box, if you like, was an AM/FM radio. Another box was the telephone. Another, the navigation device. Another, the internet access. Another, weather control, climate control, and so forth. Those boxes spread over that enormous table, and sitting atop them, a gathering of cable and harnessing necessary to interconnect them. If all those functions were going to exist in an automobile. And that cable and harnessing sitting upon the top of those cardboard boxes looked like the gathering of a year's worth of one of my kids, Dan Harmon's dirty laundry, if you like. It was instantly manifest. There was no way on earth you'd get all that damn stuff into the car. Then on a table half the size of this one, they had a series of cardboard boxes, which were, they said to me, the digital equivalent of those analog boxes. And sitting on top of it was what appeared to be a strand of spaghetti. It was an optical bus. What all this stuff did in the analog world, or does in the analog world, we can get done if you will find the funding to underwrite it. We can get done in this digital system expression. I was looking at the future, sitting on that little table. And I decided, damn it, we're going to find the money to do this. That altered the direction of the company forever. I suppose that was an aha moment. I'll give you one last aha moment. 2 years ago, I listened to a young senator speaking his view of the world and of this nation. That was, of course, Barack Obama. And he was so stirring and so moving and so unlike almost any politician ever I had heard. And I remember someone turning to me and saying, "That is so stunning. That evokes John F. Kennedy." And I remember saying, "It does not. That guy evokes Abraham Lincoln." And I tell you, in the cadence in which he speaks, you can hear the writings of Abraham Lincoln. And in the things he says, there are echoes of Abraham Lincoln. I think we're about to finish. Let me give you a quick passage from what I believe was and continues to be the single most glorious speech by an American president in the history of this country. And it was Abe Lincoln, not at his second inaugural, but speaking to the Congress in what we today speak of as the State of the Union. And after what must have been an hour and a half of reciting pretty mundane stuff about the budget and things like his decision to create a new department of the government, the Department of Agriculture, he launched into the speech that I think everybody must read, and some of us ought to really memorize. He began with this: "The dogma of the quiet past is inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise to the occasion. As our task is new, we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we can save our nation." I think that's glorious, and if you think it's good, let me recommend the rest of the speech, because it gets better after that.
What a fitting conclusion, Sidney. And I'm really thrilled to have shared this hour with you today. On behalf of Marshall and Dean Ellis and the students who will be viewing this in the future, it was a wonderful experience, and thank you very, very much.
Let me thank you, Bill, and tell you that as a consequence of this colloquy and my previous encounters with you, I understand why my wonderful young son, Dan, thinks that you epitomize a teacher and a professor.